Good afternoon and welcome to the Sunday Sit-In. If you are just coming on, we ask that you maybe put your name and where you're from in our chat box. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. We want to thank everybody for joining us this Sunday afternoon, where we will have a very lively discussion.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle Evans-Oliver, and I am the president of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History here in Richmond, Virginia. For all of those who don't know what ASALH is, that's our acronym, it was founded by Carter G. Woodson, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, in 1915, and it has been going on ever since. Here in Richmond, Virginia, we were chartered in 2020, and all of our events practically have been online, but that has not stopped us yet. We've had people to join us for our Sunday sit-ins, our Cultivate series, our Wind Down Wednesdays, all from all four corners of the United States, from as far as Texas to as far west as California to as far north as Minnesota. So we're so happy for you to be here with us today for our racial and social injustice, lynching and Confederate monuments, and much, much more. So I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Shelley Murphy, who's our host for today. But before I do, I would love for you to join in with the poll that we have here. And if you can answer those questions, I'll turn this over to Dr. Shelley Murphy, our host. Thank you for being here.
Thank you all. Welcome. Thank you for filling out the poll. I first want to say we appreciate you being here Sunday afternoon with us and looking forward to the conversation. Michelle, did you want to share the results of the poll?
That would be Janaea. I don't see it here. Janaea, do you have the results, or are they still coming in?
Yes, we actually have 35% participated. You can continue to participate in the poll. Majority right now, 70% say that there is not a Confederate monument in their public square, public space. And we also have 59% saying that there has not been any controversy in their community regarding a local monument. So again, we have a majority no for both questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. Well, let me first introduce our two speakers. So we're going to have them talk about some things they've been involved in, and then we'd like them to share information about the current projects that they're working on. So I want to introduce Dr. Andrea Douglas. She holds a MA and a PhD in art history from the University of Virginia and an MBA in arts and management and finance from Brigham University in New York. Dr. Douglas is the executive director of the Jefferson School African American Heritage Center in Charlottesville, Virginia. Welcome, Andrea. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jelaine Schmidt. She's an associate professor of religious studies at the University of Virginia, and she is also the director of the University of Virginia Democracy Initiative Memory Project. And we are going to hear a lot more about both of these ladies and what they're involved in. I'd like to start off a couple of questions about recently the University of Virginia, the Batten School, put out a study about lynchings and monuments, and that there was some connection or some correlation between them. And Dr. Douglas, I know you led an effort regarding the John Henry James getting a monument, historical marker up about his lynching. I'll start with you, Dr. Douglas. Would you share a little bit about what you thought about the Batten study? And then I'll turn it over to Dr. Schmidt.
Sure. Well, the Batten study really confirmed some things that we had already known. In 2015, EJI, which is the Equal Justice Initiative, had already issued their report, and they listed the relationship between communities that had lynchings and communities that had monuments. And in particular, that report pointed to something like 10 states that had these relationships, and Virginia was one of those states. We became involved with thinking about lynching because of the Blue Ribbon Commission. The Blue Ribbon Commission was called in response to the sort of when Ziona Bryant in 2015 brought her petition requesting the removal of monuments. She had about 700 signatures at that point. And that brought the issue to fore in Charlottesville. And as a way of sort of addressing it, the city council created the Blue Ribbon Commission to public spaces, monuments, and race. And out of the recommendations, much of the attention was placed on the monuments, but one of the recommendations was to participate in this Equal Justice Initiative Community Remembrance Project. And Charlottesville, Albemarle County had a lynching. It was in 1898 of John Henry James. And so we created, Dr. Schmidt and I, we've been working on these projects together for quite some time now. The commission met from 2016. The recommendations were made in 2017. And by 2018, we had taken a delegation of over 100 people down to Montgomery to inter the soil. But on the way, we embarked on what we call a civil rights tour, which we're doing another one of those, and we'll talk about that a little later. But yeah, it was a way really of trying to create a relationship between the violence that happened in Charlottesville in 2017 and the larger conversation of racial violence in America, that lynching is a component of, this is much of this kind of violence is about racial terror, and lynching is racial terror. And we wanted to be sure that our community understood where Charlottesville sat in that longer and broader history. So John Henry James, not to get too deeply into it, he was accused of raping a white woman, a young white woman. He was, for fear of mob violence, removed from Charlottesville, brought to Stanton. The next day, which was July 12th, he was brought back on a slow train. We now know that the train was stopped at Woods Crossing as a consequence of a man dressed up as a woman who flagged the train down. He was removed from the train, shot several times, hung, and then left there, which, that is a story that is not typical to Albemarle County. This is a narrative that you hear very often in these instances. And so what we were able to ultimately do was engage, after coming back, the entire community, or a good amount of the community, in a conversation about this. We were able to put a marker in Court Square, which is the county seat. This is a space shared by Charlottesville and Albemarle County. It's the judiciary space. And we put a marker there with the hope ultimately of receiving the EJI monument just as soon as that's possible. Okay. Jillian, do you want to add more to that?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I just think just to explain that racial terror lynching, of the post Civil War era, and particularly after the Reconstruction era was ended in 1877, it was an enforcement mechanism, and it's there's a reason that we talk about it as racial terror lynching. This is a phrase that the Equal Justice Initiative, Brian Stevens' organization in Montgomery, has affixed to this phenomenon. Is racial terror lynching. It's an enforcement mechanism to keep Black people in their place. And when these different legal strictures were put in place, Jim Crow, as we call that, legalized segregation, and were put in place. And this was then the lynching was an extra legal kind of reminder, of what would happen if there was even a hint, that there might be some sort of challenge to the Jim Crow legal regime. So it's wholesale intimidation and a daily reminder to Black citizens about, who belonged to the body politic and who did not have a claim to it and who did not. And just to kind of to make the connection here, as the study does, that I put the link here. Someone asked, what does EJI mean? It means the Equal Justice Initiative. That's an organization in Montgomery, Alabama, that's headed by Brian Stevenson. And they have a memorial there, national memorial for lynching victims that is there. And so every community in the country where there's been a lynching, they've tried to document it. And definitely go to EJI.org. I would say to the audience, plug in your zip code, your home county, and they have an interactive map there, and you can see who was lynched and when in your county. You'll be surprised, I'm guessing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And understanding that, Dr. Schmidt, before we show your video, and you and Andrea both are talking about public spaces. We're talking about lynchings. We heard the word monument. And I think that's going to bring in to introduce your other project, so I think it's all tying in together. And so if it's, well, you got it pulled up.
Yeah.
It's going to take you right there. And then we can cue your video if you want it before or after your slides.
Right. I just wanted to show the audience kind of a snapshot of what Charlottesville's downtown looked like until very recently, until just a few months ago, right? Juxtaposing what the physical landscape looks like in our public spaces, that is these very large looming monuments, that were there, juxtaposed with the demographic facts of the Civil War era, which was that over half of the population was enslaved. So just kind of let that, you see Charlottesville in the news, and, I'm sure, a lot of you are come here, in the audience, you probably heard about, some of the violence that we were subjected to in 2017, Charlottesville. Did you know, though, that over half the community was enslaved? And so this is what we say, it's like those statues were lying to us from the moment they were put in.
Yes.
Because when the Union troops arrived on May the 3rd, or March the 3rd, 1865, the majority of the population here was relieved, jubilant even. And we have the archival evidence to prove it, and so these statues were put in as a way of kind of salving hurt pride, of these defeated Confederates, of kind of assuring themselves that things were okay, and effacing the history of over half the community. So just want to say, just to put that in context for the audience, this isn't even a case of where, 10% of the population was Black, and half of those were enslaved. It's like, no, over half the population was enslaved, so we didn't want these statues there, and we had and we'll kind of, we'll talk, a little bit more here. I want to show you our project that we've been working on here to kind of rectify this problem that we perceive that we have in terms of public space and how anti-democratic it is, and that's why Dr. Douglas and I are working on this. And it does connect with lynching, because this is all of a sort. It's creating an atmosphere that is, keeping one segment of the population in its so-called place, so we want to democratize our public space. So can I show our video now for our project?
Yes, because one of the points I want to make is about your memory project, which you'll talk more about it. And what's so fascinating, especially for me as a researcher, is what do we choose to remember?
Yes.
And then What do we choose to forget about? And I think all of this ties in and connects to this whole lynching, monuments, removal, rebuilding, and the whole 9 yards. So yes, if you queue up and introduce the Memory Project, we've got a 2.5 minute video to share with you that will talk about the Swords to Plowshares project.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Dr. Andrea Douglas, and I'm the Executive Director of the Jefferson School African American Heritage Center. Our hope with Swords into Plowshares is to create something that transforms what was once toxic in our public space into something beautiful and more reflective of our entire community's social values.
This project will take the Lee statue, melt down the bronze, and use the bronze for a new work of public art.
It is a community-based project that all of the voices of our community will be able to articulate what we want in our public spaces, as opposed to objects that were given to our community that highlighted a particular ideology that we no longer share. We've been working on this for a long time. In 2015, a young woman, Ziona Bryant, wrote a petition as part of a school project. 700 people signed, and she requested the statues be removed. After a long process and a commission, the city voted to remove the statues.
Because we wanted to change, we were attacked by white supremacists. The whole world saw our trauma, but more importantly, our resistance. Support for Swords into Plowshares has been overwhelming. Our community will confront white supremacy with creativity. Beauty will heal the ugliness of the past.
I think this project offers a roadmap for communities who are also grappling with what to do with their statues.
It's taking something that was static, molding and melding it into a new substance, and then having a community dialogue with an artist about how to transform the material into something new. The process itself is change-making.
It allows us to understand that history is being made today, and that as we create change, we are in fact creating history.
Creativity calls on the best parts of ourselves. It's transformative by its very nature.
We're giving people opportunities to engage with our own narratives and our own histories.
To make this transformation, we need your help. Please donate to Swords into Plowshares.
By donating to Swords into Plowshares, you become part of history. Join us, be part of our team, help us create Charlottesville's new future.
Thank you for sharing that. I'd like you, Dr. Schmidt, just why this? Tell us why this, why the people that are here listening, and we all are in the Charlottesville area and understand some of the changes that happen. So why this and why now?
Yeah, well, this came about, and there's been a debate kind of brewing with, so many communities who are kind of reevaluating their public spaces and saying, is this figure of, Columbus or, or this colonizer or this, Confederate general, is this really who we are today? Is this expressing our values? And communities deciding that no. But then the question is, what do you do with these statues once they're removed? And I, I'm a religious studies scholar, so it's a moral question, I would say too. Any therapist worth their salt will tell you if you have a problem and you just shove it in a closet, that's not healthy. I mean, I think we all know, to kind of not, it's like, oh, it's not good, so I'll just close the door on the closet. And just a lot of communities that remove these statues are doing that. They're just kind of putting it into storage, and I call it's moral stasis. We don't know what to do with it. It doesn't belong in public. We don't know quite what to do. So we're just going to put it in a closet and forget about it or something. And so that's not a really good solution, because it doesn't allow a community to kind of work through, what is it about our values that we want to change, to really have that kind of conversation about going forward. It's like, we know we don't want that. We don't want it, but what does it mean going forward? So that's the question. And that's what we're trying to do. Is what does it mean going forward? The problem we had, when Dr. Douglas and I really started talking about this was last September, when there was a Confederate soldier statue that was in front of our courthouse for 111 years, in front of the county courthouse. So it's inside of Charlottesville, but it's officially owned by the county. And the County Board of Supervisors of Albemarle decided to remove the statue. But Dr. Douglas and I and some other people were not satisfied. We were concerned about where it was sent afterwards. So that's what we're concerned about. I call it how to treat your toxic waste. What do you do with something that you've decided is too harmful, that it doesn't belong in public? It needs to be taken out of public, but what do? Do you just put it in a closet, or you just ship it over the mountain to somebody else? It's like, here, have our toxic, we don't want it, but here, have our toxic waste. And then it's like causing tension in that community. That doesn't seem like a good solution either. And so in thinking about this, like, what is our responsibility for the afterlife of these statues after they've been removed? That's the question, you know?
Excellent. So I'm going to throw this over to Dr. Douglas now. And Dr. Douglas, you know, we've known each other for years. You know what I do, research, big supporter of Jefferson School African American Heritage Center. And a lot of these things that we are involved in comes back to this project, and the Jefferson School is right there with UVA, you know, carrying the torch, you know. And I hear Dr. Schmidt saying, you know, where do we go from here? And we're talking about the toxic waste that's in the communities. And it's not just Charlottesville, it's other communities. So, and other people should, and hopefully are having this same kind of dialogue. They might not have you two, but they should be having that dialogue coming up when it's time for something to move. So where do you see the community's involvement? Because there's so much support that I see locally. And as far as to share that so other communities can hear, why do you see that as something important? That the community needs to be involved, and not just the Jefferson School Center and the University of Virginia?
Well, largely because these objects were placed in our public spaces without the entire community's agreement. And that one of the things that we want to do is to change that narrative. Part of the Swords and the Plowshares project is not just acquiring the statue and melting it down, but it is, as you say, this community engagement process, focused in some ways on hearing descendant voices, giving them some privilege in this conversation, but also realizing that we are talking about public, and we're talking about spaces, and we're talking about the ability for those who live in our community to engage in that quality of life at its highest level, and that is about its public spaces. As Dr. Schmidt alluded, when these statues were placed in our community, it was a message to the African American community. At the very same time that this extra legal activity is going on and statues are being placed, there's an African American community that is prospering, that is beginning to grow, that is building, buying property, buying land. And so the wanting to sort of walk away from that past history that was clearly punitive into another history that allows all of the voices of our community. Virginia is not the same state that it was in the 20th century. The numbers of people and the demographics of our own community suggest that we need to be much more responsive and much more open to a broader sense of what cultural values are in the 21st century. And that's what we're trying to do. So, you know, on March 5th, we will launch our Swords into Plowshares community engagement project. It is an opportunity for the broadest swath of Charlottesville to, in small group meetings, in large group meetings, in spaces that make them most comfortable to have this conversation, to really talk about what those values are. What are our social values? What does it mean to be in public space? How do you create an inviting space for the full breadth of our community? It is that conversation that is going to then guide the artist in the RFP process. And Charlottesville, again, will make that choice, which is in direct opposition to how those original statues were placed. And Dr. Schmidt and I have been engaged in this conversation with our community for years. We have first identified through public tours the symbolism and the histories of these monuments. And now we've gotten to a place where that part of the conversation is over, and we want to move to the next part of the conversation, which is one that is more inclusive and more representative, as she said, of our cultural values as a community.
And going forward too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also as a roadmap for other communities.
Correct.
If we can do it, certainly they can do it.
And the way Charlottesville is centrally located, and Albemarle County surrounds it, but we also have adjacent counties that are all linked in. Charlottesville is where people come to work. That's where your main hospitals are. And I'm talking about the surrounding. And you mentioned that it was open for the Charlottesville area. So these other communities, and like in the subdivision that I live in a county outside of Charlottesville, 60% of them work in the city, for the city. And so they're also invited to engage, based on what I just heard you say, to be included on a voice that's coming to the table.
I would say so. I mean, I think that we are really sort of trying. Part of this project also is, there was violence that occurred in Charlottesville.
Yes.
And Dr. Schmidt and I are in agreement that Charlottesville should make decisions about this. And people have asked us, why this statue? Well, this is the statue where that violence occurred. When we're talking about swords and the plowshares and taking something that was once a representation of violence, we're not just talking about the sort of 1920s context when they were placed. We're also talking about something much more immediate in our own community. And I think that is what is at core to this, is to give us an opportunity to move to this place of healing. Give us an opportunity, as Dr. Schmidt said, to have a conversation that was begun in 2016 with the Blue Ribbon Commission, but still has not seen its end. And that's what we're hoping to accomplish at the end of this.
So the statutes pretty much throughout the South, they were erected during the era of Jim Crow. Okay. And one of the things that you two put in that proposal was that using the statute's melted bronze material in a new way will be a powerful symbol of social change. Can one of you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I'll take that. It's using the materials, these materials, and now I'm speaking about the bronze alloy, of the statue itself, has been sitting in our community for 100 years. It's been a fixture, in a central part of the community. And in this way, this to me feels more responsible than to just simply put it in storage. There's a lot of cities like Baltimore and other places that they've just put these in, out in storage somewhere, and they're just sitting there, but to actually take that pain, that condensed pain, of this, what is it? Almost 9,000 pounds of bronze, and to remold it into something that expresses our values, that to me is a working through. That to me is really looking at, dealing with that pain in a way that is creative and potentially healing, rather than just shoving it away into a closet or sending it over the mountain to some other community. It's like, no. And it's still going to be in our community. That statue will still be here. You know what I mean? And the full history of its transformation will be told too. We're not going to shove that under the rug. We're going to say, here stands, this monument, or, or whatever it is, and it was put here by the community, and, hopefully 2024, or something like that. And it used, the materials were used to be this, but it'll still be here, and that to me, that feels kind of grown up,
It does. It really does. And what's really amazing, and again, I'm kind of on the outside, I'm part of the community kind of, but it's the community stuff that's so amazing for me. And I'm putting out that plea that people need to be engaged in their community and be involved with these conversations about these monuments and stuff. And as you're all aware that, I'm researching descendants of the enslaved communities that basically built the university. They've got ancestors that they might not have known that would have built the University of Virginia. But you know what? During the time when these statutes went up, there's also descendants of those people that were cheering that on that are still here as well. And do they know? Probably. But how do we carry that on? Again, coming back to the memory part of the project that you had up, what do we choose to remember and what do we choose to forget? We are seeing this just about 24/7 on CNN, MSNBC, Fox, whatever, on what is being choosed or what people are choosing to remember. And I'm wondering if this transformation that you're seeing in this new piece of art that you both are envisioning, you've got community support. I've read just about all of those support letters that came through with that application and that letter that you submitted to the city council. So where you've had, as again, identified as somewhat toxic waste, and now we're trying to transform something and take it into the future. How long is that process going to be that the community can state their voice? And I can throw that to Dr. Douglas, or how long? Is it a 30-day process? Is it 20 days? What is the process that people will be able to engage? I would like other communities to be able to replicate something very similar, if not the same thing. But how long are you guys expecting that process to take?
We're hoping to be through with that by midsummer.
Okay.
I've kind of thrown out into the stratosphere, trying to get it done by the anniversary of John Henry James's lynching. I threw that out. I like symbolisms, but we'd like to get this part done by midsummer so that we can move on to the next piece. If we can really engage an artist by 2024, we will also have addressed that 100-year mark when one of the last of the monuments were placed. So do we think we're going to have a monument in 2024? No, I think we think somewhere in 2026. Because you've got to give time for the fabrication of that monument. So we understand that this is a process. And at each point of that process, we go back to the community, right? We do this first set of engagements. We write an RFP driven by that, and it's the community that's going to make the decision about what artist and what object. Our aim is to create something that is equally as aesthetically important as what was considered in the 1920s, that these objects and what those objects said about Charlottesville. We're hoping to create something that has equal import. So so hopefully by 2026, we've done this.
That looks great. So Dr. Schmidt, here I come, Isaiah 2.4 there. You posted something in the chat. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, well, I'm a preacher's kid, and it's Sunday, so.
And we're all not in church, but take us on into church.
I'll take you to church. I will. Yeah, I mean, here the prophet, is pronouncing something, that the vision, the holy vision is of peace and well-being, and togetherness, that rather than the tools of war, the swords, the spears, rather let's have tools of peace and cultivation that make crops for sustenance, and so the whole vision, is one of nurturance and nutrients, rather than hatefulness and war, so this is what we wanted. And so, I mean, if I can editorialize here, I just like I think, if we're talking about public space, we want it to reflect our values. Everybody's taxes are paying for this. Everyone is supposed to feel comfortable there. You know what I mean? So we don't want something in our public spaces that valorizes or, represents values that we don't hold. We're a multiracial democracy while we still have it, and we want our public spaces and what we have there, what's supported by to reflect those values. That's why we want that there. And that's why, I would hope anyone would be supportive of multiracial democracy, no matter who your ancestors were, whether they were enslaved persons or the slave holders or some mixture thereof, which is a lot of us in this country.
Right.
I would hope that we can all hold a vision, of being together in a multiracial democracy and marking our public spaces in ways that support those goals.
Which is
also too, Shelley, can I just add one thing to that too? I also want to sort of disavow this notion that we're replacing one statue for another.
right.
We're not doing that, right? This is as open a conversation as it's possible. We are talking about objects. The only thing that we know about is this one sort of material substance, which is the bronze, right? But this object could take multiple forms. It could be multiple objects. So even in this conversation about the democratic values, we're also talking about what is this thing that would best represent this place. And it is not about taking one object and then putting another one in its place and maintaining that same conversation that is about adoration and adulation. It is really about how do we create the best visual language that articulates, as we've been saying, the notion of what Charlottesville believes itself to be in the 21st century, right? And how do we move that conversation forward? And what is that thing that is able to do that? We see monuments and monumentalization occurring with all kinds of things, even the monument that you have worked hard on, the monument to enslaved laborers. Certainly there's a physical object associated with it, but there's also a growth pattern of trees that occurs in March, where these trees come to bear and there's a pathway. So there are very many ways to think about monumentalization, memorialization, and that is also as much a part of this conversation as everything else that we've been describing.
And both of you have mentioned that it really kind of somewhat started back with Miss Bryant and her writing a letter, basically about the monuments. So during this whole process, and I'm going to come after 2017, has there been pushback, number one, about the Lee statue being removed, and then coming into the Swords and Plowshare project? Yes, you got a lot of community support, but I'm also questioning, are there people that are saying, no, don't do this? It's even more negative. You just explained one part, that it's not just replacing another, but have you seen different things of the history and the legacy of Robert E. Lee or any of this coming up? Because I think communities also need to know there's going to be two sides on how people feel about these things.
Oh, more than two sides, for sure. Yeah. And I have to say, Dr. Douglas and I did not suggest this, do not do this rashly.
Okay.
We are both, if I may say, we both have doctoral degrees. Dr. Douglas is an art historian. I have a PhD in religious studies. So we think a lot about objects in public space and values and this sort of thing. So this is not something that was rashly conceived, and yes, we are aware of the history of Robert E. Lee, and I've studied this in some degree, I think sometimes there's this thinking that, well, if I really had studied, it's like, no, I did study it. And that's why I think this, anyone out there, I would recommend Ty Sedgley's Robert E. Lee and Me. It's an excellent book, a memoir of the former history professor from the United States Military Academy at West Point about his kind of coming of age with, venerating the lost cause and General Lee, and how he has come to regard that now as a mature historian and human being, in the 21st century. So yeah, we're not doing this rashly. We've looked around and we want to expand the range of options. We're not saying that every community, that every statue should be melted down. That's this is not like some pat one size fits all answer to this question. Each community and each statue too, to be quite honest, has its own history. And Dr. Douglas and I have gotten quite granular with each of these statues that are in our community. They each have a different history, different values, different constituencies that we're rallying to put, you know what I mean? So,
Right.
So this isn't a blanket solution here. This is it's a specific statue, the Schrader-Lintelli 1924 statue of Robert E. Lee in Charlottesville, Virginia. All right. That we feel is a good candidate for this. And this expands the range of options of what to do with statues post removal. It's not the only option. It's not even the most recommended option in every case,
Right.
but there's now more options.
And I think it's, for me personally, and again, I'm a researcher and I pretty much focus most of my time on slave era research. And but one of the things, and again, for me, is that community engagement. And I think that is the best solution for anything, to try to make sure everybody's at the table, they get a voice. Because in the history, especially African Americans, that voice wasn't always there. So while we're going through here, I'd like to turn it over to Michelle and find out if there's any questions. So the community that's here listening would like to ask Dr. Douglas or Dr. Schmidt, and we'll go from there.
We have some questions.
Great,
Thank you, Dr.
great.
Smith. Thank you, Dr. Douglas, for your information here. I'm going to go first to the Q&A because that's the easiest one to pull up. And John Mitchell from Richmond, Virginia, who's here at the beautiful monument, joining in from us from, is it Maymont Park? He says, now that the monuments have been removed, does anyone believe they should be replaced? If not, why? And if so, with what?
It's going to take a community effort to find that out. We're not even making any recommendations. We're not saying, replace it with something else here. It's like first of all, every community is going to need to consider that on their own, considering, their own history, and much more so here. That's what this process is about. We don't know what's going to go in place of it or what should, but communities need to consider what their values are.
Yeah. And where does that perspective look to the future based on what I heard?
Yeah, sure. And I also want to emphasize too, that there is some sense that we're doing this, that we're taking one object and putting another right there. Mm-hmm. We don't even know if these objects are going right back into Lee Park, right? Mm-hmm. Or into the parks where the monuments once were. And Lee Park is no longer called Lee Park. I have to say it's called Market Street Park, but we're not even advocating that this is the site for it. We have no site. Our site is Charlottesville. So before people begin to say that we are, taking one object and replacing it with another, we're not advocating for any of those things. What we're advocating for is the conversation, right? That particular space is used by, that's where our cultural festivals occur. Mm-hmm. That's where Pride festivals occur. That's where the vegan festival occurs. It may very well be we just need that space. Right? Because we want to be able to have more people in the park. So no one is making any assumptions.
Maybe it'll be an amphitheater. Who knows? I mean, it's like,
right? These objects, and so I think that one of the things that I want to be most clear about is that when you're talking about a democratic process, when you're talking about openness, what we also want to engage in is the very conversation about what is appropriate in defining public space. And how does the public define that space for itself, right?
Right.
And that's the broadest range of what we're attempting to accomplish.
Yes.
Michelle?
Yes, thank you so much. And we have a question from Sean Jones, who is our president in ASALH Atlanta. Thank you for being here, Sean. His question is, someone please comment on the pushback that you have received regarding the idea of destroying the General Lee statue. I saw a poll of GOP voters who were opposed to destroying Confederate monuments to a clip of 64%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's no unanimity in this. There wasn't either when it was put in. There was a whole swath of the community that was not asked. And remember my first graphic, over half the community here was enslaved. Okay, again, this is a specific conversation about Charlottesville and that specific statue and this community's history, you know. So this, you know, yeah, there are people that are in opposition, but again, this is about democratic space. If this is public space, things that you know, monuments to people that fought a war to keep people enslaved, that doesn't belong there. It's like, it's a democratic space, it's public space, and that's what belongs there. You know, so I'm sorry if those people disagree, but you know, why are you, my question to them is, why do you want to laud anti-democratic heroes in a public space? So I throw the question back to them. Of all the things that we share in common, values that we share, why would we do this, something that's so painful and so harmful? There's so many other,
To the majority of the people who were there.
Yeah, in this case here in Charlottesville, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And in places like South Carolina, Louisiana, that had enslaved majorities as well. You know, people forget
Absolutely.
that. Mm-hmm.
Andrea, did you want to add anything? Because if not, I'm going to turn it back to Michelle. Okay.
Nope.
Michelle, is there another question? Because if not, I've got one last question for each of them.
There is a comment from Katie Clark that says GOP voters and leaders seem to represent elevated toxic waste in their legislative actions, elected representatives, false propaganda, even about CRT being taught in public schools across the Commonwealth, et cetera. It saddens me that what appears to be happening now. Thank you for sharing so much with the engagement strategies with us. We in Arlington County changed our county logo, the name of Lee Highway and Dominion Drive to Langston Boulevard and Old Lee Highway to Cherry Hill Road after extension community engagement involving citizens. I thought that was a question, but it was a comment. So I'm going to turn it back over to you.
But it's a very good one.
Yes.
It's a very good one. So communities, and I'll say it this way, just based on that and what we heard today about the project, you know, Swords to Plowshares, it looks like the community is saying, you know what? Yes, we do. We want to have that option to engage, to say what that future in our community looks like and what art or whatever it's going to be placed that represents us. And again, I think Andrea said, you know, or Dr. Schmidt, whatever, it's everybody. We're all here together, regardless of what shade you are or color, race, however you identify, we're all here together. So hopefully when the community comes in and engages in this conversation, seems like at least in Central Virginia here, we're going to have plenty of time for input to come in and be able to get some ideas that at least the majority at the time can agree on, and it's something we can all stand with.
Well,
So
it's worth, I just wanted to say that, you know, when the decision was being made, you know, there was, you know, kind of a call was put out, you know, from the city, you know, like, you know, what should we do with this? The only proposal that came from a local organization was from the Jefferson School, was this Swords into Plowshares proposal. It was the only one that came from the community itself. And again, we have the resources here to solve our problems, to face the ugliness of our past, we can do that right here. And Dr. Douglas, the Jefferson School is leading the way with that, is saying we can do that here. There were no other proposals that came in that originated right here. And so it just feels like, to use local resources and to consult local people about what we want our local space to look like, that just seems like the best solution.
And that's interesting, because when they put up the memorial to the enslaved laborers, and Dr. Douglas was definitely instrumental in that part, they went to the community on that.
Mhm.
So I have to give kudos, to the commission that was set up and to the people that were involved that led those community gatherings. I sat at the table at a few of those meetings. And so they were posing out questions, but you know what? When you walk away, you really feel differently. And again, that's the experience that you had some part of that. So based on time, I want to throw a question out to each of you. This is one that I do anytime I'm out here moderating or whatever. So I want to ask each of you, and I'll let Dr. Douglas go first. If you had, because you two have been very instrumental in a lot of things that have happened. You've been leaders here and in the engagement process. But if you had something to say to your younger self, what would you wish you had known? Think about where you're at. So it's you first, Dr. Douglas.
My younger self wanted to look at pretty pictures and think about, paintings. And that's why I became an art historian. My younger self would have never have thought,
Right.
Even though I grew up in a very political household, that I would be here. But I think that my younger self and understood the idea that I wanted to be doing something meaningful, that I was interested in change, that I was interested in ideas and causing people to engage in conversations. So I believe that what I know now, and when I talk to that younger person, is that the notion of listening and hearing people and hearing people's stories and hearing people's pain and understanding the value of those stories is what drives me today. I believe wholeheartedly in Charlottesville as a place that has a lot to offer and to teach our larger nation. And it is unique in that way. Its histories are deep and they're long and in very real ways continuous. And they start at the beginning. It starts at the beginning. That first, we're talking about the growth of an African-American community, 1760. You were able to begin to chart that growth. So as we're doing this work, and as people ask me how I feel about history, I understand that this work is deeply engaged with a long history that is about an American democracy, and it's located here. So listening, I would tell my younger self, you need to calm down, you need to stop being in your own head, and you need to listen to the people who have to live the life or who have lived that life that I right now have come to so appreciate.
Thank you for that. Dr. Schmidt.
Well, I think, when I was younger, I think like in my 20s, I was studying theology a lot. So I was kind of, there's a lot of thinking about, ethics and this sort of thing, but it wasn't, and I was also doing lobbying on Capitol Hill as well. But so these were kind of abstractions, kind of working on policy, working on, kind of theoretical conception. So I would say kind of a turn toward the material world, and toward how people interact, with material objects, and what that says about their values. I don't think I'd really considered that as much at that time, about how the actual material physical objects are shaped by people, but also shape them, I guess. And that's what I would kind of like wish I would have, kind of come to that realization sooner, I guess. Yeah.
And again, just to close out, and I'll give it back to Michelle. And I think about the process of Ziana coming up high school. Even the students at UVA, when they were going for the memorial, it was students that raised their hands, basically said, wait a minute, the same thing. So hopefully for the work that you have done, that we're bringing those youth with us, to keep this movement going. So
They're bringing us.
Well, they're bringing us. They're definitely bringing us for sure. But the thing of it is that, we can go back and say what we would say to our younger self. They are the younger ones right now, and they're doing, and it's a little bit differently, but it's also encouraging. And so I appreciate both of your time. I'm going to give this back to Michelle, and we're going to close out. And I just want to say thank you. You two are my heroes, and I am following you all the way and there to support you. So Michelle, I'm going to give it back to you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Dr. Shelley Murphy, Dr. Andrea Douglas, and Dr. Jalen Schmidt. What an engaging conversation that we've had here today. There's more. We have more to forge on and fight with. And I appreciate you being the forerunners of this project and just being here to just be a part of what's going on in Virginia, in Albemarle, and Charlottesville, everywhere. This is something that is needed. This is something when we need people like you two, you three. I mean, it's amazing just to hear and just to, I'm in awe just to listen to you all. I can sit here about another hour or so, but we have to close. It is 5:55. We are going to close at 6 o'clock here Eastern time. I want to go ahead and say once again, thank you for being here. Thank all of our participants for being here as well. If you have any questions, you can always email ASALH Richmond. So that email address is asalhrvainfo@gmail.com. It is February the 27th. We have had an engaging February. And this February, we've had Wind Down Wednesdays. We have 4 film series. And they range from the Dismal Swamp all the way up to Your Family History. If you're looking for more information on those, you can go to either our Facebook page, ASALH Richmond, or you can go to AARP Virginia. We've also had a Cultivate Black History Month presentation with the farmer, Michael Carter Jr., and that information is on our Facebook page as well, and AARP Virginia's Facebook page, and also their YouTube page. Farmer Carter, Michael Carter, he actually, I'm looking for it here. He actually talked about crops, benefits, and lifestyles. He talked about Africa and African American and the plant and slavery. So if you want more information about that, please go to our pages and get that information. It's about an hour long or an hour and 15 minutes long. Now, next month, we have 2 more Sunday sit-in and another Cultivate series. Now, our Sunday series will talk about Vietnam veterinarians. It's a saluting Black Vietnam veterans, and it is March the 29th and is a National Vietnam War Veterans Day. Each year, AARP Virginia tries to salute our Vietnam veterans with a unique event, and we will have that on Sunday, March the 29th. And one more. On March the 22nd, it will be our Cultivate series, and we will have Agriculture, Crops, Benefits, and Lifestyles, the history between plants. I'm sorry, that's not it. It's Crops, Benefits, Lifestyles, Gardening, and Farming Basics, Historical Links of Farming. Now, if you all are gardeners, be on this call. If you're not a gardener and you want to learn about gardening, be on this call as well. We're just so happy just to be able to talk and teach people what we know and just to engage everyone with our conversations. If you have any questions, or if you would like to see some other type of information on our Sunday sit-ins or Cultivate series, please email us once again at asalhrvainfo@gmail.com. Thank you so much, AARP Virginia, for being our sponsors in all of our events. I mean, you guys have really like hugged us and surrounded us, and we appreciate your support. It is now 5:59, and it is time to close here. I want to once again thank everyone and thank our illustrious panelists. And if you have any other questions, please email us. Have a great evening. Happy ending of Black History Month. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.